So I just wanted to thank everyone for coming today. My name's Hamida Glasgow. I'm the Executive Director and Curator at the Center for Fine Art Photography in Fort Collins. We've been really fortunate to collaborate with different venues around Northern Colorado and Denver. Working with Artworks, Center for Contemporary Art here in Loveland has been especially wonderful. It's a fantastic organization that we love to work with, and that does so many great things for the community. So it's really an honor for us to be a part of this collaboration. I wanted to just start from the center's perspective. I'd like to thank Fort Fund and Colorado Creates. We get grants for both those organizations. And then I know Sarah wanted to thank the Arian Foundation for their funding. As you know, the arts are, well, everyone, it's a challenging time for everyone right now, but especially for arts. And so we really appreciate all of the supporters and everyone that's here in an actual reception. I can't even almost believe this, right? I feel like giddy. There's a part of me that's so giddy about this. And to be in a room with art and people. So with that, I would like to introduce Sarah LaBerre, who, for people that don't know her, our audience doesn't. And if you would like to say a few words.
Sure, yeah. I'm Sarah LaBerre. I'm the Executive Director and Curator of Artworks, Center for Contemporary Art. And I am thrilled to have, hi everybody on Zoom. I'm thrilled to have all of you here. This is so exciting. This is absolutely amazing. For those of you who have never been here, Artworks has been around for about 9 years. We are a nonprofit, not-for-profit 501c3. And we have 29 artist studios. So after the talk, mingle, walk around, and walk down our hallways and meet some of our artists in action, and you'll see some great contemporary art happening. We have about 8 to 12 exhibitions a year. So you can sign up for our newsletter and be a part of that and hear about all the exciting exhibitions we have. Colorado Asians opens today next door, and we are so thrilled to have Renluka here. It's just phenomenal. I feel really selfishly excited because I get to look at this every day I come into work, which is pretty awesome. And we also have a membership program. So if you're not a member, come sign up. We've got a sale going on through today, which is pretty great. And there'll be some membership perks in the coming years. Hamida, thank you so much. This partnership started last year and it has been phenomenal. It's really, really a wonderful wonderful partnership, and you have really been a mentor to me, so thank you for that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, and I'll let you introduce Renluka, but thank you.
So I was fortunate to see Renluka's work and get to know her a little bit. We included some of her work, a different series, in an exhibition that we curated last year, which was our first NEA funded exhibition called The Right to Herself. And during that process, I saw some of this work and knew that I had to show it. And I was just taken with it immediately. And so, so we were really fortunate to be able to host the work here. And Renluka Maharaj works with photography, installation, research, and travel. And her work is often autobiographical, investigates themes of history, memory, religion, and gender, and how they inform identity. Renluka was born in Trinidad and Tobago. She lives and works between Colorado and New York City and Trinidad. She works with photography, installation, and research and travel. And has a BFA from the University of Colorado Boulder, an MFA from the School of Art Institute of Chicago, where she received the Barbara de Genevieve Scholarship. And her works are in the collections of the Art Institute of Chicago, Museum of Contemporary Photography in Chicago, the Joan Flasch Arts Book Collection, and Los Angeles Center for Digital Art. And we are honored to have her here today to talk about this particular series, Pelting Mangoes. Renluka, if you would like to come here.
Sure.
I feel like I'm a little short, but can you hear me at all? Is this thing working, or as long as you can hear me, we don't need to turn it on, but they're saying so. Oh, okay. Knew I should have worn heels. It's on?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Is that better?
Yeah, so everyone like in the back, as long as you can, yeah, that's good. Okay. Because I can't tell. So thank you all for being here. It's really exciting to see so many people turn out for this. I feel really good about that because there's a natural curiosity to find out something that you don't know about, or perhaps maybe know a little bit about. And for me, I'm on this journey with you in that way. In 2018, I did a DNA test, and it came back, 100% South Asian, which I kind of figured it should have maybe. I was kind of disappointed that there wasn't something else connected to it, because the British were there for hundreds of years. So, so that kind of started me on this journey of wanting to find out more about my history, my family's history through this DNA. And so I started speaking with a genealogist, and I started getting all this information about my grandparents. And I have more information on my maternal grandparents than my paternal grandparents, unfortunately. So that's still in process of trying to figure out all these kind of histories and how it all ties in. And so I did a body of work at Rule Gallery in Denver in 2019, talking about my family history. And then this actually came out of that, that body of work that I did. So it's just sort of like a natural sort of thing that happened. I started looking more into other indenture histories, and I decided I wanted to focus on the women, because women are usually kind of erased generally from history, and in this particular sense, their voices were never heard. They were, controlled by either, a planter, an overseer, a husband, a partner in some way. And so their stories, you don't really hear about them. You see images of them like I've portrayed here, but you don't really hear their stories. So for me, it was important because they do pass on our cultures, our practice, they maintain our religion, our families. And so for me, giving them a voice in some way was important. So a little bit of background on the history. So in 1845, let's go back a little further. So in the Caribbean, in the country that I was born, slavery was abolished in 1838. The British were growing a lot of sugarcane and cultivating for production of sugar, right? And so after that was abolished, they wanted, the freed slaves wanted more money. Basically, they were offering them, I think it was around 24 cents a day to work. And the freed slaves said, no, that was not enough money to live on, blah, blah, blah. So then they did not want to pay them that. So they started bringing in, the British started bringing in Chinese laborers, other kinds of laborers from all different parts of the globe, and it just didn't work out. So they wanted people who could cultivate the land. And so because they had already occupied a space, they were already in India, they figured, okay, let's bring the Indians over. And so, the Indians were unaware of this relationship that the British had with the freed slaves, right? They didn't know that they had made an offer to the freed slaves. So the Indians decided, yes, they will take 24 cents a day, which is what they were paid. And they would come over because they were told they would be able to make more money, they would be richer. And we also have to remember that, they didn't say, okay, that they were just gonna go because it was 24 cents a day. they were in a land that was already under famine, under drought, which is all under the British. And so a lot of them wanted to escape the conditions that they were under. The women in particular, it's a whole other story, because in the beginning, when they started thinking about cultivation and taking care of the land, it was very male centered. So a lot of men came over, right? And then later on, they started bringing the women through. So the first boat that landed in Trinidad was in 1845. And I don't know if I have any family that came through on that first boat. Like I said, it's an ongoing investigation into this past. And so when they landed there, nothing was what was said to be. It was grueling conditions. They lived in the same quarters that the slaves did. They worked the same way, except now they were they were just paid. And that caused it caused a huge rift between, the growing Black population in Trinidad, and then the influx of Indians that came through. And that rift actually still exists today. There, of course, people are getting along, right? There's more understanding about culture, but there was so much culture that came in, because you had the Chinese were already there, and then you have the Indians, and you have the Blacks, and then you have, I remember growing up, with a Spanish hair cutter, or, and so it was a really interesting time, for everyone to be in the space at the same time, and on the ship, what was interesting on the ship, you have people on the ship from different castes, different backgrounds, different languages, and they were all on the ship together. And it was very difficult, because you really can't communicate. You have different eating habits, right? Foods. But at some point, they decided, in order for them to survive, and which is also what they did on the plantation, in order for, to survive as a culture, would be to come together. And so a whole other kind of, I guess, Indianness, for lack of a better term, I guess, came to be, on the island. And so that's what I know. That's the culture that I come from. But it's a very rich and varied culture. So for me, it was like, how do I sort of pay homage to, the women in my family, and I decided, okay, well, this would be an interesting way, to honor them. And so in working with these pieces, it was a very emotional kind of experience, because, I'm looking at these women, I'm looking into their eyes, I'm imagining and reimagining, what their lives were and could be, and putting myself, in their situations, and knowing that, what actually happened to them. I think about my own grandmother, who was 22 when she left, and what that voyage must have been like, to leave her small village and to go to a depot and wait for I don't know how long, and then to get transferred to another depot before they go onto the ship. And I think about how brave she must have been, and what her situation was, and why did she choose to leave. And there are stories in my family, and we don't know if these stories are true or not, but they're stories. And I really have to take that it could be true, because history itself, even though it's written down, we don't know if it's true, right? Because we don't know whose point of view, who's telling these stories, who's talking about these people, and so it's like, for me, just talking about them and having everyone here see them, is to know that they existed, is to give them a place in history that they existed, that they're part of us, they're part of my family. So that's why, in naming them, I also wanted to make sure that there was this personal connection I had to them. Because it's to be photographed. These particular pieces were photographed by a French photographer, and I can't imagine like how it actually took place. I mean, you're a poor Indian woman on a plantation, you know, you don't walk around looking like this, right? Now, some of them did wear their jewelry because that was their wealth, and they were not allowed to bank or keep anything. Everything was kept on their bodies or in their homes. And I'm thinking, well, how did this actually happen? You know, were they paid? Because this guy Felix Marin, he wasn't the only photographer that did this. There were other photographers, but I focused on him because he was in Trinidad. There was a postcard industry, a thriving postcard industry, and he was a big part of that. And so he was making money off of their images. And I'm curious if they were making any money, and if it were a choice. And in looking at their faces, I feel no, because they're not smiling. I mean, one or two maybe smiling, or maybe, I would like to think that they had a choice, and that, there was a sense of agency, and there was strength and power. I mean, it's the strength and power is a given, because they traveled thousands of miles to be where they were. And so it made me incredibly sad and curious to know more about these women. And it's hard to find information on them. It really is hard to find information. So I kind of wanted to reimagine them and give them this other life. And I feel being one of them, being, a descendant, I have a right to do that, unlike a French photographer who's exploiting them for, personal gain. And so, and that's really just how this thing started. I was just, it's an incredibly sad story, and it's a very violent history with a very violent archive. But at the same time, I really would like to focus on this aspect of thriving, of finding ways to survive and to carry on. And, and the histories that they've created for us, for me and my family, it's a very rich and varied history, very inclusive history. And I really want to continue working with this and finding out more about my own family. It's like in speaking with the genealogist, I was going through some old emails last night, and he was saying to me that most likely my grandmother and my grandfather on my mother's side didn't know each other when they got onto the boat. And they were probably married on the boat or when they got off the boat, because the British would do that. They would couple people together at some point, and they would marry them. It was really bizarre. And so, because the story goes in my own family that my grandfather knew her, and they got onto that ship together. So the history itself is so fractured, right? So fragmented. The entire time, it's mostly questions that I have. Questions that some questions I may never get answers to. And so I have to figure out now, well, how do I deal, with these fragments, and how can I piece them together, to kind of build my own history and add to, whatever the existing narrative is, and to be doubtful of the written history as well, given that culturally our histories have been told orally, right? This is how we've communicated. So when things get written down, I always have to question myself. I mean, it's, part of this is gaining a little ground. I've been in touch with people in London, in France, and there's an institute that was recently set up in London to address
this entire history. So that's, that's a good thing that it's getting out there, because it's one of the largest migrations of people. Over 1 million of them were removed and sent to all the different colonies all throughout the globe. And I think it's like we are well versed, well, may not be well versed, but we are well aware of the slavery trade, right? But the indentureship of Indians, we're not. We don't know much of, and I'm learning as I go, like the extent of it, and so I'm really happy that it's important enough for you to come out and for you to hear a little bit more. So that's like a little information for you to kind of hopefully take you a little further and to find out more of what you would like to know. So that's my story for now. If you have any questions, I guess you can let me know. I mean, I guess, just ask. Yeah.
Talk about building Renluka.
Oh, the title. So yeah, so that's a good question, Raj. Anyway, so I just met Raj today, an amazing photographer. And we were talking about pelting mangoes because we both grew up pelting mangoes. It was like a time when mango season would come in. There was something about this. It was a very happy time. It's reminiscent of childhood, of being able to climb trees, or not being able to reach the mangoes. You take a rock or you take whatever was available, you threw it up at something, and hopefully the mangoes would kind of land on the ground. But the other part of the story for me is that this idea of destruction of beauty, or the manipulation to get what you want, or doing anything that you can so you get, or you can control how the end happens, is the same sort of way I think of this photographer and how he captured these women. It's when I started looking closely, and I only noticed it when they were enlarged, the photographs. The dresses that they all wore were practically the same. The jewelry they were wearing were almost all the same. I'm not saying that they didn't have these things. I'm just saying that it looked very manipulated. So that sort of manipulation and the sort of branding that he was creating, to sort of like sell it to a particular audience, is a very violent act. And so that's how the title came about. Yeah.
You were originally, I'm guessing, that Black images.
Yes.
And created all the adornment that then.
The paintings, yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, that's my process for this body of work. Yes. In 2019, I started working on photographs, and I continued for this body of work as well. Yeah. But I mean, I was trained as a painter, and I also did photography. And now I'm kind of blending all of those mediums together. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's important to kind of change the archive, right? It's like when you're looking at archive, it's from a particular person, right? And whatever their intentions were behind that. And we tend to kind of fetishize archives, right? As something, we really do, and especially like black and white imagery and stuff like that. And so I really wanted to change how these people are seen, like give them an alternative sort of story, because they were not one-dimensional, right? But they are one-dimensional in the archives. Like they existed for a particular reason, to have, these women, which they were called, coolie bells, coolie being the term for a laborer. So they existed for that reason. And that is what I want to work with, like to change that within the archives. I mean, I think there's a show going on in Canada that's actually exhibiting these pieces. I think it's the Art Gallery of Ontario, and in the original form, they're black and white. Yeah.
What is that? How are they? So that they're exhibiting
So,
them as.
At the original images, it was given to them by some foundation that had all these images. And they've also reached out to, because there are a ton of West Indians, of Indo-Caribbeans in Canada. And so a lot of the people there have contributed photographs to the show as well. But there's like thousands of photographs. I have yet to go see the show, but they haven't reached out to me. I've sent them, saying, hey, how about an alternative history, but they haven't really written back and haven't heard from them. So yeah, but that's sort of like perpetual nature of using the same imagery over and over again. We tend to believe that history, right? Because you're seeing that same picture. Like, what if that picture looks different? What if you could reimagine another life for these women, and what would it be? Because you have to remember, they came, there were only probably less than 25% of them were women out of the 150,000 that came over to Trinidad. So they were expected to be home, take like women do, take care of the kids, right? Run the household, and also be in the field cutting cane from dusk to dawn most of the time. So yeah, I mean, they took the brunt of the work with the family and everything else. Yeah.
There was another question, yeah.
No, it's just an appreciation actually of two visual effects, which is that thinking about how the animation of things, so these movements you created with your gestures, and then how in Zoom now people get to choose their background. You can tell as they sort of sink into it. So I just want to appreciate this sense of the creativity of choosing your own background, and that's just the visual effect I get. I just really love it.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
So with the paintings, when you're adorning the women, are you picking one specific like cultural influence for each, or are you putting a lot of different cultural influences in what they're wearing?
Well, I mean, they were each, I thought about each of them separately, even though they all sat together in my studio, because I felt like they were each conversing with one another. But yes, I really wanted to give them distinct personalities. And I was thinking, of course, like, people in my family and the personalities, like this one there, I named it, like Ma from Mother, right? And she was actually the most difficult one to work with for me, because, when my mom passed away, that was like, I don't think I ever really dealt with that. And so that's always a thing. And so I think it was like her looking directly at me, that gaze, it was extremely powerful. And when you're working up close, from here, it's like, oh, it's not that intimidating, right? But it's like when you're working up close, the space is like, it's huge. And so yeah, it was a very difficult piece for me to work with. And yeah, but it's but there's a sense of reverence as well, when you're working close to them, and you're constantly thinking about them. There really is a reverent moment, and because you kind of lose yourself in the repetitiveness of the mark making, and in the imagined stories, and yeah. So yeah, each distinct personality. I hope so.
When I first saw this woman who's, I forgot the title.
Indira.
Indira. I look at her and I think, that woman was a badass.
Right?
She looks formidable to me. And I love the way that the reverence, like you said, that you've given her in that treatment, but I think you've accentuated that, but the look in her eyes is so
Yeah, she's very
strong.
challenging.
Yes, she is.
Yeah, yeah, she is challenging. I think also it's interesting because there's a sense of monumentality even in that small space
Yes.
that I also imagined. So yeah, maybe it's just the angle, but yeah. Oh yeah, right. So that piece I decided to do because I wanted to give the women some context. Because, you know, as you see them individually, right, they're portraits, but when you see them there, you know, it gives you a sense of place, you know, like, you know, that they were more than just sitting for a postcard photo, right? That they were mothers, daughters, sisters, people, I know, a part of everyone else. They were not separate. They were a part of the entire thing. And so, you know, I mean, I don't know how many people are there. I didn't even count. But that photograph I was really curious about because I wasn't sure, like, why that happened. You know, it was the same photographer, and I don't know where. It was definitely taken outside. I'm not sure if it was taken when they landed. It couldn't have been because they would have to go through, you know, it was an island called Nelson Island, similar to like an Ellis Island, right? They would go through and get processed and then feathered out to the different plantations. So perhaps this group were feathered out into a plantation, and so that's why they were grouped. And a photo was taken, probably documenting that, because I don't know what else you would have done with this photo, rather than probably just to document that they were there. You know, and I wanted to include things that they did bring over with them. Like they would bring over, you know, they brought over books, musical instruments. They didn't bring a lot. And the women in the middle, you know, a lot of widows came over. So I wanted to portray them in white because widows is the color they wear. And, and I think one of my, I'm sorry. I love this character here. Yeah, she has
So Renluka's gone over to one of the large pieces in the other gallery and she'll be back shortly.
I made this and the fact that they're some of them are actually smiling is actually curious to me as well. So I'm thinking maybe they're smiling because they haven't really started yet, so they don't really know the extent, right, of the conditions that they would be working under. So they're still in that innocent phase. So yeah, that's why I added this piece there, just to give it some really interesting context. Yeah.
What about the blurred bits? Is that just a pointer?
Yeah, I mean these images are hundreds of years old, you know, and to get these images, you know, it was very difficult because my husband here, Thomas, you know, helped me to put these together. right? Because, you know, we would get it in pieces and we'd have to put it together. And yeah, so the images, a lot of them are blurred because photography was new, right? And people didn't know you had to stay completely still. Yeah, so that's why they're blurred. But I like all those nuances to work with because it just adds to it, makes it a more dynamic photograph and a more dynamic story. Yeah.
Thank you.
But sorry, one more question, then I have a question from the online audience. Please go ahead.
How do I choose it? Oh, so I have a lot of books that I use on designs, and I think when I'm composing, it's really hard when you're composing because I want to see everything all at once, and that's impossible, right? So you have to look. I look a lot like color relationships, texture, and it really just kind of comes naturally, not to be like weird, right? But
As opposed to, this is the only one that has sort of British fabric in the background.
yeah, well, there. Another level of storytelling.
This is very northern Colorado. Trains through.
I think it's cool.
Yeah, no, I like it too.
I mean,
but
if you want to eat, things gotta move.
right.
But yeah, I mean, I do work with different patterns from like every influence I was brought up with. You know, I feel like I have such a rich palette that it's sometimes hard to figure out what I'm going to do. And it's only going to get even more complicated the more I dive into this, right? I mean, it's, you know, the Indian influence, the Arabic influence, right? The Spanish influence, the Chinese. I mean, African is huge, the African influence. So I have all of these things that I have a right that I could choose from, right? Because I was brought up with that. It's part of my culture. So yeah, so you'll be seeing more like different sort of textiles and images being produced for sure. Yeah.
So Channing from our online audience says that they have a comment regarding a similar situation with Japanese picture brides. Images often, images often deceiving of the husband to be or bride to be. They worked in sugarcane fields in Hawaii, hard labor. Many had come from good families and had never done this sort of physical work before.
That's not the case here, though. I mean, this is different.
Right.
For sure. Yeah, I have heard of that story. I mean, I have.
Well, it's interesting. Yeah.
The correlation.
Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, the idea of a good family is problematic, right?
Well, yeah. I think when they say good, it's class, right?
It's class,
it's
right?
Class.
So it's
So and that's a very different. Well, we don't know. You know, it is speculated that these women, you know, they could have been from. I mean, they ran the gamut. You know, some of these women were running away from probably abusive relationships. They wanted to get rid of their husbands, so they were leaving. Yes, there were also prostitutes. There were widows. And then there were like just regular people, workers. You know, how some of them were kidnapped. A lot of them were lied to because the recruiters who were hired to find them didn't care how they got them. They just wanted to get paid. And so we don't know, you know, there could have been people like the Brahmin, you know, the whole caste system, right? There were Brahmins that were recorded. I mean, it says Brahmin on my father's side. On my mother's side, they are called Thakurs, which were landowners, right? And what was going on at the time, you know, the British had started taxing the landowners, and whether or not their crops yielded, whether or not they had any money, they had to pay these taxes. So a lot of them also left to get away from that because they had nothing. They were just poor, and the land was not
or fertile at times, right? So there are a lot of conditions as to why people left. But as far as the class, I think it was pretty mixed. It was actually pretty mixed. And they were all in the ship together. Yeah.
Thank you very much. This was fantastic. Thank you very much. So we're gonna sign off. Thank you all for being here. We'll be around. Renluka will be around for questions. I know, right? Easy for me to say. And thank you all online.
Hi, Serena. It's my daughter.
Oh, hi.